Judges see all kinds of cases, so some of them will be very well versed in real estate, and sometimes they're not. So as an appraiser, the most important tool you have is being able to write. You got to write a good report. We're not talking about a 15-page, mortgage lender report. We're talking about it meets the full breadth of standard 2 for use pad.
I agree, Woody. I always say if I had it to do over again, since we have to have a 4-year college degree, I would have done English. If I knew what I'm doing now, being able to explain what we do succinctly and in layman's terms is a skill.
So I always tell, my staff people I work with, just write so that the person on the other end can read it, understand it, and make an educated decision based on your work.
Welcome back, everyone, to Face Value, a podcast from the Appraisal Institute. My name is Warren Boizot. As real estate continues to evolve, properties are becoming more complex. Luxury estates with custom features, high-performance green homes, expansive land parcels, and one-of-a-kind design builds require a level of analysis that goes beyond standard appraisals. For many residential appraisers like myself, developing the skills to handle these special valuation assignments opens doors to new clients, higher fees, and greater professional recognition.
And Warren, let's not forget the growing need for valuation services in legal and financial matters. This is an area where appraisers can truly advance their career. I'm Tonia Vailas, and today I'm pleased to have on our podcast Woody Fincham, who's a dear friend of mine and a fellow residential appraiser. Hi, Woody. Nice to see you today.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. At this point, I'm about 26 years into my career. I've got my SRA designation, my AI-RRS, and a couple others, ASA, and actually, I think I've got more letters behind my name now than I have in my name. I'm an instructor for the Appraisal Institute as well. I do residential topics for the Institute and do a little bit of writing here and there, some podcasting here and there. And as far as my practice goes, we do quite a bit of litigation work. We do everything from diminution in value stuff to Department of Transportation work. Do quite a bit of green and high and what we call high performance homes. Green's sort of a term we don't really use so much anymore. I'm trying to think what else. A lot of donation work. I've got some background in conservation easement, I used to be the conservation easement and historical facade easement reviewer for the state tax department here in Virginia. I think the largest easement that we dealt with was worth somewhere in the neighborhood of about $40 million, which is, for a residential related property, that's pretty significant.
Woody, you and I have been in the business about the same amount of time. So obviously you start out in residential, you're going along. Where did the paths start to veer towards you going toward complex assignments? And, what was the reason behind that?
Well, I'll give a shout out to David Braun. David gave me the most sage advice I could ever get in my career, which was work for people who want to work with you, not with people who have to work with you. Attorneys need to work with you. They want to work with you. They're looking for you to assist them in solving some type of complex problem. I don't care how simple the litigation is. It's complex every time we get into a witness box. And I just found out real quickly that if I get away from the commoditized service work, such as, lender work, and there's nothing wrong with lender work. I mean, we still do a fair amount of it, but it's not the focus of our practice anymore. And, if you're doing commoditized service work, then, they look for the lowest common denominator to kind of bring you into the assignment, which is, your credentialing. So if you've got a certified residential license or licensed residential, they'll bring you in to work on assignments. And I want to work in an arena that requires, more than that. I mean, my SRA means a tremendous amount to the litigation clients that we work with.
Woody, I'm going to make you laugh. I was at an interview a few years back, and I used the term we whenever I talked about valuation and appraising. And they said to me, they're like, you keep talking about we. Why do you talk about we and not I? So can you answer that?
Yeah, in my situation, it is a we, because my son, who's also a certified residential appraiser, he's my business partner. He's my chief analyst that does a lot of the back end, the metrics. Our artificial intelligence and a lot of the models that we use, whether we're using Spark or we're using, some proprietary stuff that we have that we've built. And then I also have a research specialist who is not an appraiser, but could be tomorrow if she wanted to be. She writes very well. She understands what we do. And then we have a couple other people who work with us. And I say we because the success that I've enjoyed in my career over the last 5 or 6 years is because I have a team built around me. They help me do what I do.
Woody, I love your saying that you said before about how you want people that want to work with you rather than need. I think that for me, kind of veering toward just not your commoditized work came when I asked myself, when I see an order come through and I know that address, I know where that is, it's like, I don't think I like that one.
Right.
Someone's got to do it. I always say to myself, someone's got to do it. So why not me? And that's what kind of got me over time to, want to delve into these complex properties. Because just because you say no, that lender or that client isn't just going to say, oh, well, Warren doesn't want to do it, so I guess we'll just not do this loan. No, someone
Right.
out there's got to do it. Why not you?
Yeah, exactly. And, not to talk about fees at all, but the fees are better with those clients too. I mean, I've got several wealth management banks that I work with, and they've told me, if we get someone with a quota an assignment and it's really low, we're not going to hire them because we realize they probably aren't fit for the type of work that we're asking them to do. Because you know, Warren, I know you do some higher end residential work, but I mean, we're talking about here in Old Virginia. I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia, so there's properties here that I've appraised that are older than the country that we live in, and some of those properties are still sitting on residuals from the King's Grant situation, where the King was gifting property to people, and they'll have a couple hundred acres involved with it, and you'll read in the deed that Thomas Jefferson or James Madison or something like that's been involved with it. So these are complex things, and they're not your typical subdivision work where you're doing a four 2.5, and there's 16 comps. So
Where do you find comps for those kind of complex properties?
everywhere I can. At this point, we've been doing that type of work so long that we pretty much have got everything. But like in Charlottesville itself, we've got a couple of places like the Keswick. It's a very well-known luxury property kind of large estate kind of area, and those properties do transact more often than you'd probably think. And then the other major areas that we've got around the state are similar areas like that. So we'll use a lot of things from all over the Commonwealth. Here in Virginia is a Commonwealth, not a state. So I should say Commonwealth, not state. But if you're dealing with a 150-acre luxury property that's got a main manor home on it that's 15,000 square feet, finding comps for that really requires you to look for other properties like that around the state. And so, and you figure out, what's your comparable area, and it's your direct competitive market for something like that is not down the street. It's usually going to be different pockets of the state all around, and you figure that out by talking with the brokers and the consumers out there, and says, well, when you're considering property, where else did you look? And these are folks of means. They can, they care that they're within 90 minutes of an airport where they can get where they need to. They're not so much factored in on or focusing in on, I need to be in this school district or I need to be over here because I like to shop over here. These folks will spend the spring here and then the summer in Vail and then the winter in Miami kind of thing.
Woody, let's dig down. Let's get specific on some of the crazy, unique properties that you've appraised over the years. Give
Okay.
me one or two examples of what you're dealing with on a daily basis.
Probably the most notable property I ever got to appraise, and I only got to do this because I worked in the assessor's office, and we have to, even on non-taxable parcels, we have to do these every year. But I got to be the person in charge of doing Monticello one year, and it was assessment related stuff. So I mean, it's not like we're really doing, we're not. It's a World Heritage Site, so I mean, to me, it's an invaluable property, and particularly as a Virginian. I mean, it's a very well known property. But I mean, I have NDAs. I can't talk about some of the stuff, but we've done some pretty well-known celebrities, actors, people like that, and they own very unique property. I've done a couple pieces of property. The one I will mention, the folks who own it are a couple of software magnates, and they work up in the DC area. This property is all steel, all glass. It sits up on a hill. These folks are really into polo, so their house sits on a hill that overlooks one of the largest East Coast polo training facilities. And they've got a guest manor home with it. If you've ever watched the movie Iron Man, the house that Tony Stark lives in,
About 1,000 times. My son is addicted, so go ahead.
yeah, my kids too. But it's in that style of home, which is in Virginia is very rare. If you're not a Georgian piece of architecture or traditional colonial or something like that, you kind of stick out. And this property is all steel and glass, and so it's not unlike just about anything else that we'd seen. that was a hell of an assignment, a hard assignment, excuse me, to do. And, we were working with architects on cost because, you do a cost approach on something like that. You're not going to go to a guide for that. You got to talk to specialty folks because, the contractors who can even build those types of homes are very few and far between. So, and Warren, I'll mention one more. I did Thomas Jefferson's godfather's property. And
Wow.
so there's actually Jefferson was well known to journal all the time, like most of the folks did back then. And James Madison's much younger than Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson was there visiting the property, the folks that lived there, and there's an entry in his journal where he talks about he was playing the violin while Madison was dancing in the parlor. And neat property. And that one, the last thing I'll mention about that one was these old homes have the old float glass in them, so it's kind of wavy glass. And so I guess one of the enslaved people who took care of the little girl who lived there at the time had hand etched in one of the panes her favorite horse, and it had the date on it. So it was, I still get goosebumps thinking about it.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the more elaborate green homes that you valued?
We've done several. We've done a few LEED certified homes, which LEED is mostly known in the commercial world. It's very expensive to get a LEED certification, and so these properties are usually going to be very intentionally designed. They're usually very expensive to build because a LEED certification on a residential property is going to run you in the thousands of dollars, whereas like a normal certification you'd get on a normal green home is going to run you a few $100s. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into them. A lot of architectural design goes into it. All kinds of technology. Not just smart technology, but passive heating, how they position the property on the site so that it takes advantage of solar exposure and other natural elements on the property. LEED also takes into consideration, runoff water.
Can you let us know a little bit about how we can improve the performance of our house to become more efficient into like a green home?
Sure. Usually the best place to start is to find someone that does building science that can get just consulting, like a home rater, and get them to come out and consult with you and talk about, because every home's different, right? So, if your home's, 25 years old, it was built to whatever the model energy code was for that time, for that municipality, and it's probably old, and it probably doesn't have enough insulation, doesn't have enough weather stripping. Some of the mechanical features of the property, like the HVAC and the water heater, are most likely, antiquated, and they're not as efficient as they could be. Green can cost a lot of money to retrofit. When you're doing a retrofit, you want to bring a professional in, like a home energy rater, who can walk you through what's going to be the most efficient things. I know a lot of people, they try to hire me to do feasibility analysis. Hey, we're going to do a solar system, solar PV for electricity. And they're like, well, we're going to spend $65,000 to put the system in, and it's going to take us 15 years to recapture it. And I'm over here going, well, I'm happy for you to pay me to do this, but you would probably be better off spending your money on weatherizing your home. It's much cheaper to go to all your penetration points, like where your plumbing's going in and out of your walls, and get that tightened up. Make sure your windows aren't leaking. Make sure your duct work is not leaking, because a lot of times, even on new builds, the ductwork's not as tight as it should be. And you can do a home energy rater can come out and do what's called a duct blast test. And they'll go in and they'll check how much air is actually escaping out when they do that. So tightening things up like that goes a long way to saving some folks some money. And even things like, just changing all your incandescents lights over to LEDs. That's a tremendous amount of savings there. But there's all kinds of things you can do. And, like with anything, we're looking at contributory value. And usually those smaller things will end up contributing more value in the end overall if it gets the house to a better rating than something like a solar PV system can. Solar PV should usually be one of the last things you look at. You need to have all those other things in order before you put something like that on your home.
Woody, tell us a little bit. You mentioned that you guys do a lot of litigation work. Tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about, your practice and what experience and what specifics go into litigation work for you guys.
Really, litigation work is just being able to do what we do well, being able to write well. Appraisers are technical writers. I think a lot of us forget that we're writers. It's what we really do. We do a lot of research, and we have to be able to explain very nuanced topics to people that don't normally deal with this stuff. Litigators are very intelligent. They're very good at what they do. but it's rare that I meet a litigation specialist as an attorney who knows a lot about appraising. They do exist. I mean, there are some MAIs out there that actually have their JD and practice in both worlds, but what we do is hard. It's hard to understand. I mean, even a lot of our colleagues that do what we do for a living aren't great at explaining what we do, right? So being an instructor and being able to, as you guys can tell, I'm a little verbose. I don't mind talking. So, when you're sitting in a witness box, you got to be willing to, you're there to educate the judge or the jury. They're asking you questions because they want to know things. Judges see all kinds of cases, so some of them will be very well versed in real estate and sometimes they're not. So as an appraiser, the most important tool you have is being able to write. You got to write a good report, and we're not talking about a 15-page, mortgage lender report. We're talking about, it meets the full breadth of standard 2 for USPAT. We're explaining and summarizing everything. If I'm going to put an adjustment in there at $65 a square foot for gross living area, I'm not just telling them I'm doing that. I'm also explaining and I'm showing them charts. I can run them through the different things that how we support what we're doing. So you got to put all that work in. But then the second part of it is being comfortable in the witness box, and that's tough for a lot of. There's some really good appraisers out there that won't touch litigation work because they don't want to be in a witness box. And the first couple of times you do it, it's pretty scary. I mean, I had a couple of good experiences, so I didn't get frightened from it. But if it wasn't for people like Steve Roach and who teaches our litigation series at the Appraisal Institute and some other folks, Rick Carlisle's another guy. They're just all really good, and I can call those folks up anytime. I run into all kinds of situations where I'm like, I think we can do that, but I'm gonna call out a lifeline here, and I'll call one of my mentors and ask them about it. And you got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable because there's nothing, even when you're the best you can be.
I agree, Woody. I always say if I had it to do over again, since we have to have a 4-year college degree, I would have done English. If I knew what I'm doing now today, I would have said I should have had English. But being a great writer, you're right. But wouldn't you say when you're on that witness stand, being able to talk to a layman, to explaining what we do, which can sometimes get very complex and technical, being able to explain what we do succinctly and in layman's terms is a skill
Yes.
that a lot of appraisers that are super smart don't have.
You got to be able to explain it to them like they're a sixth grader. And that's not being, I'm not trying to denigrate anybody who's sitting in the jury box, but I don't know if they have a graduate degree or if they didn't graduate high school. All I know is they're there in the box. And that's the other thing you have to be able to do with a jury trial is you've got to be able to read the jury. I mean, if you're not connecting with them, you're going to lose them. And, that's never a good feeling. I've lost members of jury panels before. And, that when they start glazing over, I mean, I did a 2-day testimony last November, and it was in a farming community. And some of the folks there, when we started talking about contributory value items, I was losing them. There was not really much I could do for that. But they had also listened to another appraiser prior to me, so I think they were just over it.
Well, one of the things that I remember when I started appraising was to keep it simple, stupid. I don't know if I can say
Yeah.
that, but KISS was the acronym that we used all the time. And in reviewing, I've reviewed several appraisals where people write like they're writing a thesis. And at the end, I'm like, who's the end user? Who is going to digest this language and take action on it? So in litigation, they're going to make a decision. There's going to be a settlement, or the attorney is going to come up with what does the attorney come up with? A verdict, right? Or the jury is going to come up with a verdict.
Right.
So there's always some sort of end role, and there's an end, I guess, an end user to our work. So who are they? So I always tell, my staff, people I work with, just write so that the person on the other end can read it, understand it, and make an educated decision based on your work.
Yeah. You asked me about we earlier. I mean, we is important because when I write something, I know exactly what I'm trying to say. But because I already know what I'm trying to say, I may not realize that I'm not making a complete thought. So having someone else to proof your work is super important.
Expert witness testimony. Residential appraisers on a daily basis can practice this talking in layman's terms, I mean, when you're in a person's home and there's a homeowner there, and sometimes you have ones that'll just back off and don't talk at all. And you have others that are inquisitive about, what are you doing? What are you going to do? How does this process work?
Right.
You think, I use the term comps all the time. You say that to a homeowner, they don't even know what does comp mean? What is that? So,
Right.
thinking about how you talk to just a homeowner is practice for possibly being on the stand one day where, okay, well, there's sales in your area. And that's what we use a lot of times to develop a certain methodology for determining how much your home is worth. Dumb it down. There's words that you can't use that even the homeowner doesn't know. So practice.
Sure. I mean, when you're writing and you use terms like that, you have to define them as you're going. If I'm going to say comp, which we don't when we're writing a report, but I mean, if I'm going to use that, I'm going to explain what it is before I use it. So real estate agents and brokers have become one of my best allies in my practice. This year, I'm serving as the treasurer, and I'm on the executive leadership committee for our local real estate association. I'm the only appraiser who's ever done that. And most appraisers run the other direction when they're dealing with real estate agents. And I think that's an unfortunate way to look at it. We need to talk to the agents anyway, because that's how we get, some of our data to help support why we're making an adjustment. I mean, we can sit down with all this fancy charts and tables that we want to comparing stuff, but we may come to the conclusion that, yeah, this particular item has a contributory value. And then you talk to the market, and the people in the market say, well, we didn't even consider that. So you shouldn't be making an adjustment for something that the market doesn't even think about, even though there might be we may be jumping that causation's coming from some correlation that doesn't actually exist in the market. So it's good to be able to have that kind of communication with the agents and the brokers out there.
So you've done so much in your career. What advice do you give people who are looking to branch out to the litigation or to the special use property or more onto the financial realm? How do you advise them to expand their horizon and to do more to advance their career?
Well, I think a couple of traits that are really important. And, as we get older and we mature, I'm getting more patina as I get older, less hair and more wrinkles. One thing I've noticed that about myself and other people that I really respect in the profession is that they seem to be lifelong learners. They have a philosophy of, I want you to prove me wrong. Not because I have an ego or anything like that, but I'm relatively confident and competent in what I do. But that doesn't mean that I always know the answer. And so I'm always open to receiving feedback from folks. And if I'm wrong, show me where I'm wrong. And I want to learn that. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to use it the next time around. And so I think it's super, super important for appraisers to both be curious and open to learning. And I say this in class a lot. The day that you wake up and you think you know more than anybody else out there about the appraisal business is the day you should probably hang up your clipboard. Not that any of us carry clipboards anymore, but at least on the residential side, we don't. But that's super important. But I mean, if you're really interested in doing litigation, there's a couple classes the Appraisal Institute offers. There's the inconsistency in appraising class that's not really part of the litigation series, but it's really designed. Rick
I
Carlisle
think
wrote
it's
that.
called Inconsistency Hiding in Plain Sight.
Great class. So you got to be open to that.
So, Woody, it was a pleasure having you on the show.
Woody, thank you. And Woody's also been good in the history of this podcast of sending us ideas and emails about things he could present or other people could present. So thank you for that. But Tonia, if anybody did have an idea or someone that they thought should be on our podcast, who would they contact?
Well, they would contact you and I, of course, and that's at facevalue@appraisalinstitute.org. And thank you for joining us today, and see you all soon.